She was 17, and she had been erased. Not slowly, not with argument or grief, just erased, the way you cross a name out of a ledger when the accounting no longer suits you. Her mother had not raised her voice. Her stepfather had not needed to. They had simply handed her a garbage bag with her clothes inside and told her the door would be locked by 9. And when 9 came and went, and the lock clicked, and the porch light went off, Nora Jean Aldis stood in the driveway of the only home she had ever known and understood that she was no longer part of it. She had $11 in her coat pocket, a library card, and a silver locket on a chain around her neck that her grandmother had given her the Christmas before she died. And it was that locket, small and tarnished and worth almost nothing, that would, 7 years later, lead Nora to a deed, a name, and a life she had never thought to want for herself. But that comes later. Welcome, if you're new here. This channel tells quiet stories about ordinary people and the turns their lives take that nobody saw coming. If this kind of story means something to you, subscribing means you won't miss the next one. And drop a comment. We'd love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Her full name was Nora Jean Aldis, and she had her grandmother's eyes, gray-green and steady, the kind that did not look away from things. Her grandmother's name was Vera. Vera Aldis had lived alone in a small house outside of Canaan, Ohio. A proper house with a garden out back and shelves of books and a sewing machine she had run for 60 years and had never once sent out for repair. Because she fixed what broke, and she did not replace things that could be mended. Vera had raised Nora's father, who had died in a road accident when Nora was 4, and when Nora's mother Sylvie remarried 2 years later, Vera had done what grandmothers do. She had stayed close, stayed quiet, stayed available. She had picked Nora up from school on days Sylvie forgot. She had taught Nora to sew on the old machine, guiding her hands through the first slow seams. She had sent birthday cards with a $5 bill tucked inside and signed them with her own name and a small drawing of a bird, always a different bird, as if she were working through a private list of them. When Nora was 13, Vera had given her the locket. It was silver, or silver-plated more likely, about the size of a quarter, with an engraved pattern on the front that was worn smooth in places from years of handling. Inside was a photograph too small to make out clearly, a woman in a pale dress standing in a garden. Vera had told her it had belonged to her own grandmother. She had told her to keep it close. She had not explained further, and Nora had not asked, because she had learned early that some things came with their full meaning already inside them and did not require explanation. Vera died that winter. Heart failure. Sudden, on a Tuesday morning in December. Nora had not been allowed to go to the burial. Sylvie had said she was too young. Her stepfather, a man named Don Cresswell, had simply not answered when Nora asked him directly, which was how Don Cresswell handled most things that inconvenienced him, by making himself unavailable to the question. Don Cresswell was Sylvie's second husband and had been in the house since Nora was 6. He was not violent. That was what Sylvie said when she said anything at all about the dynamic, and she was right in a technical sense. He did not hit. He did not threaten. What he did was colder and more consistent than either, he maintained, with the particular patience of a man who understood leverage, that Nora was a visitor in a house that belonged to him, and that her continued presence depended on her making herself easy to overlook. He did not say this directly. He did not need to. It was communicated in the way he spoke over her at dinner, in the way the household budget did not extend to school trip fees or winter boots that fit properly, in the way he and Sylvie made decisions about holidays, about the car, about what the family did on weekends, without including her, not as an oversight, but as a habit. When Nora was 15, Dawn had a son. The baby's name was Tyler. The house rearranged itself around Tyler completely and immediately, the way a house will when something genuinely wanted arrives in it. And Nora understood what this meant before anyone said anything. She was already peripheral. She became, after Tyler, essentially invisible, except when there was something that needed doing, in which case she became briefly visible long enough to do it. She kept her grades up. She had her grandmother's steadiness. She did not confide in friends because she did not trust the version of events she would have had to tell, and she was not ready to hear it said aloud in her own voice. She worked weekends at a laundromat 2 blocks from school, folding other people's clothes, keeping the machines running, and she saved what she earned in a coffee can under her bed. Because she was not sure why she was saving, but she knew she should be. She was 17 when it ended. Not because anything specific happened, but because Dawn had done the math, and the math no longer worked in her favor. Tyler was a year old and needed the room Nora slept in. Or so she was told on a Wednesday evening at dinner, with no particular drama. Sylvie had looked at her plate through most of the conversation. Dawn had been calm and reasonable. He had given her 2 weeks' notice, which he seemed to consider generous, and when the 2 weeks were up and the garbage bag was waiting by the front door, he had shaken her hand. Actually shaken her hand. As if she were leaving a job she had decided to quit. She did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say. She picked up the bag and she left. The locket was around her neck. She had not taken it off since Vera gave it to her. She slept on a bench in the Greyhound station that night. Then 2 nights at a shelter that smelled of industrial cleaner and was loud until well past midnight. On the 4th day she walked into a truck stop on Route 30 called the Halcyon Rest, a wide, low-slung building with a diner on one side and a fueling station on the other, and a motel row of 8 rooms at the back. And she asked the woman at the counter if there was any work. The woman's name was Bev, and she had the look of someone who had heard every kind of request and had developed a precise internal system for sorting them. She looked at Nora for about 4 seconds. "You 18?" Bev said. Nora was 3 months from her 18th birthday. "Close enough," she said. Bev looked at her for another 2 seconds. "You show up on time?" "Yes." "You can run a mop?" "Yes, 6 in the morning," Bev said. "Don't be late." She was not late. She was there at 5:47. She mopped floors and wiped down tables and cleaned the restrooms and took out trash and learned the rhythms of the place, which were not so different from the rhythms of the laundromat, cycles of busy and quiet, machines that needed attention at predictable intervals. A cast of regulars whose habits you could set a watch by. She slept in one of the 8 motel rooms for the first 3 weeks, an arrangement Bev made without being asked to make it, charging her half the nightly rate and deducting it from her pay. When she turned 18, she got her food handler's certificate and moved to the diner side part-time. When she was 19, Bev taught her the register and the ordering system and the inventory spreadsheet and told her she had a good head for systems. She did. Vera had taught her that, in the way Vera had taught her everything, quietly, by example, by showing her how to look at a thing and understand what it needed. She rented a room from a woman named Sadie Hauk, who owned a house 4 miles from the truck stop, and rented to working women at reasonable rates, because she had, as she said, been a working woman herself for 60 years, and knew what reasonable meant. The room had a window that faced east and got the morning light, and Nora put Vera's photograph on the sill, the one she'd taken from the mantel before she left, small enough to fit in a coat pocket, Vera standing in her garden, and she made the room as much hers as she could. She kept the locket on. She never took it off. The lost locket was not hers. That is the part of the story that requires saying clearly. It was a Friday in March, 3 years into her time at the Halcyon Rest. when Nora was mopping the far aisle of the diner after the early breakfast rush. The aisle between the window booths and the counter stools. A woman had been sitting in the last booth by the door. 50s, Nora had noticed, neat gray hair, a good coat. The kind of woman who drank her coffee black and read something on her phone and did not need to be fussed over. And she had been there for about 40 minutes and then left, paying at the counter, and Nora had not thought much about it until the mop knocked something small and hard across the linoleum, and she bent down to pick it up. A locket, silver, the size of a quarter, on a broken chain. Engraved pattern on the front, worn smooth in places. She stood in the aisle and looked at it. Her heart was doing something she could not name. The locket was not identical to hers. It was older, the engraving different, a vine pattern where hers had a simple border. But the size and the weight and the particular quality of the silver, tarnished in the same way, the same degree of handling visible in the same places, it was close enough to stop her where she stood. She brought it to Bev and told her a customer had left it. Bev put it in the lost and found box under the counter, a shoebox with a lid containing a paperback novel, a child's mitten, a set of keys, and a phone charger, and said if no one claimed it in 30 days, it was Nora's to do something reasonable with. No one claimed it in 30 days. Nora held it in her palm for a long time before she opened it. When she did, the hinge was stiff. The photograph inside was older than the one in her own locket, sepia-toned, very small. A woman in a high-collared dress standing in front of what appeared to be a building, not a garden. On the inside of the lid, in very small engraving she had to hold to the light to read, EST. 1902, Aldous. She sat down on a stool at the empty counter. Her name was Nora John Aldous. Vera's name had been Vera Aldous. Aldous was not a common name. She had looked it up once. Years ago, there were fewer than 200 people in the country with it, according to what she'd found. She turned the locket over. On the back, very faint, barely legible, a town name. Carver, and 2 initials beneath it, M.A. If you're still with this story, and we hope you are, this would be a good moment to subscribe, so you're there when the next one comes. These stories take time to find, and we don't want you to miss them. And we're curious, have you ever found something that seemed meant for you to find? Tell us about it. She did not act quickly. Quick was not her nature. She started with what she knew. Aldous, Carver, Ohio. Because Ohio was where Vera had lived, where Nora had grown up, and it seemed the right place to start. She looked up Carver online during her lunch break at the diner, using her phone and the Notes app to keep track of what she found. Carver was a town of about 4,000 people in the northeastern part of the state, 90 minutes from where she was. She found a brief historical entry in a county website, settled 1887, incorporated 1902, built around a mill that had operated until the 1940s. Nothing about an Aldous. She went to the county library on her next day off. Carver was in Pryor County. She drove there, 45 minutes, and sat with a librarian named Mrs. Okafor, who knew the local history collections the way a pharmacist knows the shelves. When Nora explained what she was looking for, Mrs. Okafor asked 2 or 3 brisk questions and then went into the back and came out with a folder from the county deed archives, photocopied and organized, labeled Aldous. M. Carver, Property Records, 1898, 1947. Margaret Aldous. The M.A. on the locket. Margaret had been a seamstress. She had come to Carver from Pittsburgh in 1898 at the age of 22, alone, and had set up a small alterations business out of a rented room. By 1902, she had saved enough to purchase a building on the main street, a narrow two-story with a storefront on the ground floor and living quarters above. The deed was in her name alone. In 1902, that was not nothing. The records showed the property had passed through several owners after Margaret's death in 1941, had been a hardware store, then a dry goods store, then vacant, then briefly an insurance office in the 1970s, then vacant again. The last recorded owner in the county file was a name Nora did not recognize from a deed transfer in 1989. Mrs. Okafor told her the county assessor's office would have more current records and gave her the address. She went to the assessor's office the following week. The building on Main Street in Carver had changed hands twice more since 1989. The current listed owner, and here the clerk had to look twice because the paperwork was not entirely in order, was an estate. Specifically, the estate of one Vera M. Algis of Canaan, Ohio, who had purchased the property in 2004 for $1 from the previous owner. A man named Russell Coates, who had owned it for 11 years and wanted, according to a handwritten note attached to the deed, nothing more to do with it. Vera had owned it. Vera had bought it, quietly, and had apparently done nothing with it, and had told no one, or at least not Nora, and not Nora's mother, or if she had told Sylvie, Sylvie had not passed it along. Vera had died in 2014. The estate had never been properly probated, because Don Cresswell had handled the paperwork, as Don Cresswell handled everything that came with documentation and the appearance of authority. And he had either not known about the Carver property, or had chosen not to surface it. Either way, it had been sitting in Vera's name for 9 years since her death. Nora sat in her car in the assessor's parking lot for a long time. She called a lawyer. She did not know any lawyers, so she called the legal aid clinic in the county seat, where a young man named Davis explained the process to her patiently. As the only direct descendant of Vera Algis with a legal claim, Nora's father had been Vera's son, and Nora was his sole heir. She had standing to petition for letters of administration and have the estate formally settled. It would take time. It would require documentation. It would cost some money in filing fees. But it was not complicated. It was, Davis said, one of the cleaner cases he'd seen. "What's in the estate?" he asked. "A building," she said, "in Carver." She drove to Carver on a Saturday in April. She had the address from the deed. The building was on the main street, exactly as the records described. Narrow, two-story, brick, with a storefront window that had been papered over from the inside, and a door with a hasp and padlock that had rusted shut. The paint on the facade had gone to chalk. The sign brackets above the door were empty. But the brick was sound, she could see that much, standing on the sidewalk in the April wind. A man came out of the barber shop next door. He was in his 70s, white-haired, moving slowly but with the uprightness of a man who had been physically capable his whole life and still had most of it. He looked at Nora looking at the building. "You buying it?" he said. "I own it," she said. "Or, I will." He introduced himself as Franklin. He had been in the barber shop for 31 years, in the same location, and the building next to him had been empty for most of that time. He told her the last tenant had been an insurance agency that moved out in 1993. He told her a developer had made noises about it in 2016, but nothing had come of it. He told her he would be glad to have the place occupied. He said it with the mild emphasis of a man who meant it practically, not sentimentally. An empty building next door was an eyesore and a liability, and he was tired of looking at it. "You know anything about the woman who owned it before?" Nora asked. "Before it went vacant." "Seamstress named Margaret." Franklin thought about it. "Before my time," he said. But my mother talked about her, said she was the best tailor in 3 counties. Said she never turned away anyone who couldn't pay full price. Said she'd do what she could for what you had. Nora wrote that down when she got back to her car. She wrote it down because she wanted to remember it exactly. The probate took 4 months. Davis was thorough, and Nora was patient, and the court was unrushed. In August, on a Tuesday morning, she stood in a county clerk's office and received the letters of administration that made her the formal heir of Vera Algis's estate, which consisted of 1 parcel of real property in Carver, Ohio, assessed at $11,000, and a savings account that had been sitting dormant in a bank in Canaan since Vera's death, accruing interest on a balance that Vera had never touched after she'd opened it in 2006. $23,000, now grown to just over $26,000 with nearly a decade of interest. She drove directly to Carver. She sat in front of the building. It was hers. Vera had made sure of it, not directly, not with a conversation Nora could remember, but in the way Vera did everything, quietly, practically, over a long period of time, without requiring acknowledgement. She had found the building. She had bought it for $1. She had held it. She had not told Don Cresswell, which meant she had known, on some level, that Don Cresswell was not to be trusted with things that belonged to Nora. She thought about the locket in the diner. She had never learned who had left it there, and she had stopped expecting to. Some things arrive the way they arrive, and the explanation for how they found you is less important than what you do with them once they have. The locksmith she hired to open the hasp was a woman named June, who drove from the county seat and had the padlock open in 3 minutes and charged her $25, and seemed faintly amused when Nora told her what the building was. "Seamstress's shop," June said. "Huh, originally, what are you going to do with it?" Nora had been thinking about that. "Something useful," she said. The interior had the particular stillness of a space that has held air for 30 years without being disturbed. Dust on every surface, and the particular thick layering that happens when no one opens doors or windows. The storefront room was larger than it looked from outside. Good bones, Franklin had told her, and he was right. Original wood floors under the grime, wide plank and solid, a tin ceiling, 12 feet up, dented in places but intact. A back room that had been used for storage, still holding the detritus of the insurance office. A filing cabinet, empty, a broken office chair, a stack of water-damaged forms. The staircase to the upper floor was narrow and steep, and its railing was loose, but the treads were solid. The upper floor was 1 large room with 2 windows facing the street and 2 facing the alley, and a small bathroom that needed everything replaced. She stood in the storefront and turned slowly and looked at the tin ceiling and the wood floors and the light coming through the papered window in long pale strips. She did not call Gerald. She did not call Don Cresswell. She called Sylvie once, not to say any particular thing, but because Vera would have. She called and she said that she had found something of Vera's that she thought Sylvie should know about, and she told her briefly, factually, what she had found and how, and she said that she wanted Sylvie to know she was well. Sylvie was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then she said she was glad Nora was well. She sounded like she meant it, in the thin, compressed way of someone who has made many choices she has not yet reconciled and is not ready to begin. Nora thanked her for answering. She did not say anything else, and she did not wait to be thanked herself. That was sufficient. She used $8,000 of the savings for the renovation. Franklin's nephew, who did general contracting, gave her an honest estimate and stuck to it. She hired a plumber and an electrician. She refinished the wood floors herself, on her hands and knees over 2 weekends, because she knew how. Vera had refinished her own floors the same way, and Nora had watched and helped and remembered. The tin ceiling she cleaned with a soft brush and left as it was, because it was beautiful and it had survived, and it did not need to be improved. She left the halcyon rest on a Thursday in October. Bev gave her a card signed by the morning staff and a bottle of good hand lotion, because, as Bev said, Nora had put those hands through enough. Seti Hoke gave her a jar of strawberry preserves and a long hug, and told her she had always known she'd go somewhere. She moved into the upper floor of the building on Main Street in Carver. She put Vera's photograph in the window. Facing east, she put the locket, both lockets, hers and Margaret's, on the small shelf above the sewing machine she had bought second-hand from an estate sale in the county. A machine that was older than she was and ran perfectly. She had Vera's steadiness in her hands. She had always known that. She opened the shop in November. She had not planned to open a seamstress's shop, or rather, she had not planned it in advance. It had arrived as the obvious thing, the way obvious things do. Not all at once, but gradually. Each practical decision pointing in the same direction until the direction was unmistakable. Alterations. Custom work. Mending. She priced fairly. She did what she could for what people had. That was Margaret's way, Franklin's mother had said. And there was no reason, as far as Nora could see, to do it differently. Franklin sent his wife in the first week to have a coat relined. His wife's name was Dolores. And she sat in the chair by the front window while Nora took the measurements and told Nora about Margaret in the way that older women tell stories about women they never met, but know by reputation, with specificity, with the confidence of an inherited memory. She said Margaret had sewn wedding dresses for women who couldn't afford them. She said Margaret had sewn the burial clothes for 2 children in the influenza year of 1918 and had refused any payment. She said Margaret had been, by all accounts, a woman who understood that the skill in her hands was not hers alone. It had come from someone, and it owed something to someone still to come. Nora thought about that for a long time after Dolores left. The following spring, she started offering a free mending service on Saturday mornings. Bring what was broken, and she would fix it. For nothing. For anyone who needed it. A woman came in with a child's coat, zipper rusted stuck. An older man brought a wool sweater with a split seam he'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. A girl of about 14, quiet, watchful. The particular watchfulness Nora recognized, came in with a dress that had been torn at the hem, and sat in the chair by the window while Nora worked, and said almost nothing, and left with the hem stitched clean and her hands around the small paper bag of cookies Nora kept on the counter, for no particular reason except that Vera had always kept. Something sweet available. The girl came back the following Saturday. She didn't bring anything to mend. She just sat in the chair by the window for a while. Nora let her. She did not make a fuss about it. She just kept the place open and kept the chair available and did not require anything from anyone who came through the door except that they leave it as they'd found it. Word moved through Carver the way it moved through small towns, not loudly but completely. By summer, the Saturday mornings had a small waiting list. By fall, Nora had hired a woman named Celestine, who had sewn her whole life and was recently retired, and who came in 3 days a week and brought her lunch in a bag and played classical music on a small radio she kept on the shelf below the tin ceiling. The lockets, both of them, stayed on the shelf above the machine. Don Cresswell called in the spring of the following year. She did not know how he had found her number either, though small towns have ways. He was pleasant in the careful manner of a man who has done a calculation. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings about things when she was young. He said if she was ever back near Canaan, there was always room at the table. He said Patricia, and then stopped, because there was no Patricia in his life. She knew that. Tyler's mother was not Patricia, and she had never been. He had confused his story for a moment. She let the moment sit. Then she said she was well, and that she hoped he was too. She said she was busy with her work and probably wouldn't make it back to Canaan soon. She thanked him for calling. He didn't call again. She was 24 years old. She had a building with a tin ceiling and a wood floor and a sewing machine that ran perfectly. She had a shelf with 2 lockets on it and a photograph facing the morning light. She had Celestine and her radio and her lunches in a bag, and Franklin next door who brought her coffee on slow afternoons, and Dolores who had started coming in monthly just to sit and talk, and sometimes brought a thing that needed mending, and sometimes did not. She had Saturday mornings, and the girl with the quiet, watchful eyes who had started, in the last few weeks, to ask about the sewing machine, how it worked, where she'd learned, whether it was hard. It was not hard, Nora told her. It just took patience. Someone shows you how to look at the seam and understand what it needs, and then you practice until your hands remember. She guided the girl's hands through the first slow seam, the way Vera had guided hers. There is a thing that happens sometimes to the people the world discards, not always, and not automatically, but often enough to be worth noting. They learn, out of necessity, a kind of attentiveness that people who have always had enough rarely develop, an attentiveness to small things, to what is broken and what can be mended, to what has been left behind and what might still be made use of. It is not a gift. It was not given freely, but it becomes, over time, a way of being in the world that is steady and warm and useful to others, in ways that compound quietly, the way a savings account compounds when no one is withdrawing from it. Vera had known that. Margaret had known it before her. She was 17, and she had been erased, standing in a driveway with a garbage bag and $11 and a locket around her neck that her grandmother had given her to keep close. She had kept it close. She had found, years later, what it was pointing toward. Not the building, not the money, not even the name. What it was pointing toward was this: a tin ceiling and morning light through an east-facing window, and a girl's hands on a sewing machine learning, stitch by stitch, what it means to fix what is broken, rather than replace it. That was the whole of it. And it was enough. If this story stayed with you, we'd love it if you subscribed. There's a new story here every week. And they're all about the same things, really, even when the people and the places change. And tell us in the comments, is there something you inherited, an object, a skill, a way of doing things that you only came to understand the value of much later? We read everything you share, and your answers always matter more than you know. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you in the next one.